Ladies and gentlemen, the most powerful man in America versus the most powerful bank in the world. One lawsuit, billions of dollars at stake, and your money sitting right in the middle of it all. What if I told you that right now, as you watch this video, there's a battle happening behind closed doors that could change everything about how you use your bank account, how you spend your money, and whether institutions you've trusted your entire life can simply decide you don't deserve their services anymore? This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now. And Donald Trump just fired the first shot in what might be the biggest financial war of our generation. Before we dive into what's really going on here, you need to understand something that most people never realize. JPMorgan Chase isn't just a bank. Calling it a bank is like calling the ocean a puddle. This institution controls assets worth over $3.8 trillion. Let that number sink in for a moment. $3.8 trillion. That's more than the entire economy of Germany, the fourth largest economy on Earth. JPMorgan doesn't just hold your checking account or give out mortgages. This bank is woven into the fabric of global power itself. When governments need money, they call JPMorgan. When massive corporations need to move billions across borders, they call JPMorgan. When financial markets are collapsing and the world economy is on the brink, guess who gets the call to help fix it? You guessed it. The CEO of this financial empire is Jamie Dimon, a man whose influence extends far beyond banking. He advises presidents. He shapes policy. He sits at tables where the future of nations is decided over coffee and handshakes. Jamie Dimon has survived financial crashes that destroyed other banks. He's navigated scandals that would have buried lesser institutions. And he's built JPMorgan into something that's almost too big to comprehend. Some people call companies like this too big to fail. Others call them too big to control. And that's exactly where our story gets interesting. Now enter Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, you can't deny that he knows how to make waves. Trump has sued countless people and organizations throughout his career. He's fought battles in courtrooms like most people fight battles in board games. But this lawsuit, this one is different. This isn't about a real estate deal gone wrong or a contract dispute. This is about something far more fundamental. This is about power. This is about control. And this is about a concept that most Americans have never even heard of until recently. That concept is called debanking. So, what exactly is debanking? Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and checking your phone to find an email from your bank. It's not the usual promotional message or security update. It's a notice. Your account is being closed, no explanation, no warning, no appeal process. Your money will be transferred to you, but you're no longer welcome as a customer. You call the bank confused and maybe a little panicked. The representative on the other end is polite but firm. They can't tell you why. It's a business decision, company policy, risk management. Pick whatever corporate phrase makes you feel better. But the result is the same. You've been debanked. Now you might be thinking, this sounds illegal. Surely banks can't just kick people out for no reason, but here's the uncomfortable truth. They can. Banks are private businesses, and in most cases, they have the legal right to refuse service to anyone as long as they're not discriminating based on protected characteristics like race or religion. But what if they're discriminating based on your political views? What if they're closing accounts because of who you voted for, what you said on social media, or what legal business you operate that they simply don't like? That's where things get murky. That's where the law becomes less clear. And that's exactly what Trump is claiming happened to him. According to Trump and his legal team, JPMorgan Chase closed accounts associated with him and his businesses, not because of any legitimate financial reason, but because of political pressure. They're claiming this is part of a coordinated effort by powerful financial institutions to weaponize banking against political opponents. Think about how serious that accusation is for just a moment. We're not talking about a bank making a bad investment or charging unfair fees. We're talking about the allegation that the financial system itself is being used as a tool of political warfare. If you don't play by the rules of the establishment, if you challenge the wrong people, if you become too controversial, then the banks can simply cut you off from the financial system entirely. And Trump isn't alone in making these claims. Over the past few years, there have been dozens of reports about people and organizations being debanked. Conservative political activists, cryptocurrency entrepreneurs, adult entertainment workers, marijuana businesses operating legally under state law, firearms dealers following every federal regulation. The list goes on and on. These aren't just fringe cases. We're talking about thousands of Americans who found themselves suddenly locked out of the banking system, often with little to no explanation. Some managed to find other banks willing to work with them. Others weren't so lucky. When you can't have a bank account, try running a business. Try paying your employees. Try paying your rent. Try existing in a modern economy that runs almost entirely on digital transactions. Now, JPMorgan will tell you they have every right to choose their customers. They'll point to regulations about risk management and compliance. They'll talk about reputational concerns and fiduciary duty to shareholders. And legally, they're probably right. But Trump's lawsuit isn't really about whether JPMorgan had the legal right to close accounts. It's about why they did it and what that means for everyone else. Because here's what makes this situation so dangerous. If the biggest bank in the world can decide to debank a former president of the United States, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for small business owners who donate to the wrong political campaign? What does that mean for activists who protest causes that banks disagree with? What does that mean for anyone who steps outside the narrow boundaries of what powerful institutions consider acceptable? This is where the story gets even deeper. To understand what's really happening here, we need to talk about something called Operation Chokepoint. Back during the Obama administration, federal regulators created a program designed to cut off financial services to businesses they considered high risk for fraud. Sounds reasonable on the surface, right? After scammers and criminals, protect consumers. The problem was that the list of high-risk businesses included plenty of completely legal operations. Payday lenders, sure, but also firearms dealers and tobacco shops. The government wasn't making these businesses illegal. They were just making it impossible for them to operate by pressuring banks to close their accounts. The program was officially ended, but many people believe the practice never really stopped. It just went underground. It became less official and more subtle. Instead of government regulators directly ordering banks to debank certain customers, there's now what some call a culture of compliance. Banks look at who might cause them regulatory headaches or public relations problems, and they make preemptive decisions to cut those customers loose. No paper trail, no smoking gun. Just thousands of individual decisions by individual banks that somehow all point in the same direction. Away from anyone controversial. Away from anyone who might make powerful people uncomfortable. Trump's lawsuit is trying to drag all of this into the light. His legal team is arguing that JPMorgan participated in this kind of politically motivated debanking, and they want discovery. They want internal emails. They want documents. They want testimony from executives. They want to prove that the decision to close Trump-related accounts wasn't based on normal banking criteria, but on political considerations. And if they can prove that, the implications are massive. We're not just talking about Trump getting his accounts back. We're talking about potentially exposing a systematic pattern of political discrimination within the banking industry. Now let's talk about what JPMorgan has to lose here. Beyond the immediate legal costs and potential damages, this lawsuit threatens something far more valuable to a bank: trust. JPMorgan has spent decades building a reputation as a stable, reliable, apolitical institution. They want to be seen as the steady hand that manages your money, regardless of what's happening in Washington. If this lawsuit reveals that they were making decisions based on political pressure rather than sound banking principles, that reputation crumbles. Customers across the political spectrum start wondering if their accounts are safe. Are you one controversial social media post away from being locked out of your own money? Business clients start questioning whether JPMorgan can be trusted with sensitive financial information. International partners start wondering if American banks are too politicized to work with. But there's another layer to this that most people aren't talking about: the timing. Trump filed this lawsuit while preparing for another presidential campaign. Some critics immediately jumped to call it a political stunt, a way to rally his base and portray himself as a victim of the establishment. And maybe there's some truth to that. Trump has never been shy about mixing legal battles with political strategy. But dismissing this lawsuit as purely political theater misses the bigger picture. Whether Trump's motivations are pure or not doesn't change the fundamental questions this case is raising. Should banks have unlimited power to decide who gets access to financial services? Should political views be grounds for debanking? Who watches the watchers when the financial system itself becomes a tool of social and political control? These questions matter to everyone, not just Trump supporters. Think about it from a different angle. Right now, maybe you're cheering because a bank is going after someone you disagree with politically. But what happens when the political winds shift? What happens when the banks decide your views are the problem? What happens when companies you've done business with for years suddenly decide you're too risky because of a donation you made or an opinion you expressed? This isn't about left versus right. This is about whether we want to live in a society where private corporations have the power to exclude people from economic participation based on criteria that have nothing to do with actual financial risk. The lawsuit also raises serious questions about the relationship between government and big banks. We know that after the 2008 financial crisis, the line between Wall Street and Washington became incredibly blurred. Banks that were too big to fail got massive government bailouts. Executives who destroyed the economy faced no criminal charges. Regulators who were supposed to police the banks often came from the banks themselves and went back to the banks after their government service. This revolving door created a cozy relationship where banks and government agencies often acted more like partners than adversaries. So when Trump alleges that JPMorgan was responding to political pressure, he's tapping into a very real concern about how intertwined these power structures have become. Here's where things get really uncomfortable. Let's say Trump is completely wrong. Let's say JPMorgan made their decisions based purely on legitimate banking concerns with absolutely no political motivation whatsoever. Even in that scenario, we still have a problem. Because the perception of political debanking is enough to undermine confidence in the financial system. If millions of Americans believe that banks are weaponizing access to financial services, that creates instability. People start looking for alternatives. They pull money out of traditional banks. They turn to cryptocurrency or foreign banks or stuff cash under their mattresses. They lose faith in institutions that are absolutely critical to a functioning economy. So JPMorgan isn't just fighting to win this lawsuit. They're fighting to maintain the belief that banks operate fairly and apolitically. Now let's talk about what this means for you personally. Even if you never get debanked, even if you never have a single problem with your bank, this lawsuit is going to affect you. Because if Trump wins, or even if he just manages to expose evidence of politically motivated debanking, the pressure on banks is going to be enormous. Congress will hold hearings. Regulations might get written. Banks might become more cautious about closing any accounts for fear of being accused of political discrimination. That sounds good until you realize it might also make them more cautious about closing accounts that actually should be closed. Money launderers, fraudsters, actually risky customers. The banks might become so paralyzed by fear of lawsuits that they can't properly manage risk at all. On the other hand, if JPMorgan wins decisively, if the courts rule that banks have broad discretion to choose their customers for almost any reason, that creates a different problem. It confirms that debanking is legal, and that there's very little recourse for people who get cut off from the financial system. That might lead to a two-tiered banking system where certain political views or business types simply can't access mainstream financial services. Those people and businesses would be forced into a shadow economy, using less regulated and potentially more dangerous financial alternatives. Either outcome has consequences that ripple far beyond Trump and JPMorgan. There's also a global dimension to this that doesn't get enough attention. The United States dollar is the world's reserve currency. American banks like JPMorgan are central to international finance. When other countries see American banks making what look like political decisions, it raises concerns about whether the U.S. financial system can be trusted as a neutral global infrastructure. China and Russia have been working for years to create alternatives to dollar-denominated trade. Europe has been discussing more financial independence from American institutions. If this lawsuit reveals that U.S. banks are deeply politicized, it gives ammunition to everyone around the world who wants to reduce reliance on American financial power. That might sound abstract, but it has very real consequences for American economic strength and your personal financial security. Let's get specific about what could happen next. This lawsuit is going to be fought at multiple levels. First, there's the immediate legal battle. Trump's team will try to force JPMorgan to hand over documents and communications. JPMorgan will fight to keep as much private as possible. Judges will have to decide what's relevant and what's protected. This process could take months or even years. Every filing will be analyzed. Every revelation will be headline news. The media circus will be intense. But beyond the courtroom drama, there's going to be a political battle. Congressional Republicans are already calling for investigations into debanking. They want testimony from bank executives. They want whistleblowers to come forward. They want to prove this is a widespread problem. Democrats will likely defend the bank's right to make their own business decisions, while possibly pushing for clearer rules about when and how debanking can happen. Then there's the court of public opinion. Trump knows how to play this game better than almost anyone. He'll use this lawsuit to reinforce his narrative about being persecuted by the establishment. His supporters will rally around the cause of protecting Americans from unfair debanking. His opponents will argue he's just playing the victim again. But here's what matters more than either of those reactions. There are going to be millions of Americans in the middle who start paying attention to this issue for the first time. They're going to hear about debanking and think, wait, that can really happen. They're going to start questioning their own banks. They're going to wonder if their money is really safe. That shift in awareness is going to change the conversation around banking regulation and consumer protection for years to come. We should also talk about the technology angle that makes all of this even more complicated. We're living in an era where cash is disappearing. More and more transactions happen digitally. Some experts predict that physical money might be mostly obsolete within a generation. In a cashless society, being debanked doesn't just mean you lose the convenience of direct deposit and credit cards. It means you literally cannot participate in the economy. You can't buy groceries. You can't pay for gas. You can't pay your utilities. You become an economic ghost. That's why the stakes of this lawsuit are so much higher than they might have been 20 or 30 years ago. The power to debank is becoming the power to completely exclude someone from modern society. This is also why cryptocurrency advocates have been watching this lawsuit so closely. They argue that Bitcoin and other decentralized currencies are the answer to debanking. If you don't need a bank to hold or transfer your money, then banks can't control you. There's something appealing about that argument. But it also comes with massive risks and complications. Cryptocurrencies are volatile. They're difficult for average people to use safely. They're not accepted everywhere, and they come with their own set of regulations and potential government controls. Still, every high-profile debanking case drives more people to explore alternatives to traditional banking. If this lawsuit reveals that debanking is common and legal, expect cryptocurrency adoption to accelerate dramatically. Now, here comes the part that should make everyone uncomfortable, regardless of politics. What if both sides of this lawsuit have valid points? What if Trump really was debanked for political reasons? And what if JPMorgan really did have legitimate concerns about the accounts in question? Real situations are almost never as simple as good guys versus bad guys. Banks do need the ability to manage risk and protect themselves from customers who might bring legal, regulatory, or reputational problems. But that power can absolutely be abused. The line between legitimate risk management and political discrimination is blurry and context dependent. That's why this lawsuit is so important. It's forcing us to figure out where that line should be and who gets to enforce it. Think about the precedent this sets. If Trump wins, every person or business that gets debanked will potentially have grounds to sue. Banks will be flooded with litigation. They'll have to document every decision in painstaking detail. They'll become more bureaucratic and less efficient. Costs will go up. Those costs will get passed on to customers. On the flip side, if JPMorgan wins, banks get a green light to debank with very few constraints. They could start refusing service to entire categories of customers based on industry, political affiliation, or even social media presence. The financial system could become a tool for enforcing social and political conformity. Neither outcome is great. What we really need is a middle path that protects both banks' ability to manage their business and customers' right to access financial services. But finding that middle path requires this kind of high-profile legal battle to force the conversation. So where does this all end? The honest answer is we don't know yet. This lawsuit might settle quietly out of court. Trump might get some financial compensation and a non-admission of wrongdoing from JPMorgan. Or it might go to trial and produce a landmark verdict that reshapes banking law. It might expose scandals that bring down executives and lead to new regulations. Or it might fizzle out and be forgotten in a few months as the next crisis captures our attention. But whatever happens in the courtroom, the questions this lawsuit has raised aren't going away. The power of banks to control access to financial services is only going to become more important as our economy becomes more digital. The relationship between political power and financial power is only going to become more complicated as government and business become more intertwined. What's certain is that this case is a symptom of something much larger. We're living through a moment of profound institutional distrust. People don't trust the media. They don't trust the government. And increasingly, they don't trust the financial system. Every scandal, every abuse of power, every example of the rules being different for the powerful than for ordinary people erodes that trust a little bit more. Trump's lawsuit against JPMorgan is one battle in a much bigger war over who controls the systems that shape our lives. It's about accountability. It's about fairness. It's about whether we still live in a society where institutions serve people or whether people now serve institutions. Here's what you need to remember. This isn't just Trump's fight. This isn't just about one lawsuit or one bank. This is about the future of money, power, and freedom in America. It's about whether you can be cut off from the financial system because someone in a corporate office doesn't like your politics or your business or your opinions. It's about whether we're going to sleepwalk into a world where banks are the new gatekeepers of acceptable society. And it's about whether we have the courage to demand something better. The truth is, most people won't pay attention to this lawsuit. They'll see the headline, assume it's just more political drama, and scroll past. But you're still here. You're still watching. That means you understand something important is happening. You understand that the battles being fought in courtrooms today determine the world your children will inherit tomorrow. You understand that power unchecked becomes power abused and that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So stay informed, ask questions, hold institutions accountable, and don't let anyone tell you this doesn't matter. What do you think about all of this? Should banks have the power to debank people for political reasons? Is Trump right to sue JPMorgan? Are we headed toward a future where access to money becomes a privilege instead of a right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation is just getting started. And if this video opened your eyes to something you didn't know before, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into the stories that really matter. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening behind the headlines. Because the more people who wake up to these issues, the harder it becomes for powerful institutions to operate in the shadows. The fight for financial freedom isn't happening on some distant battlefield. It's happening right now. And whether you realize it or not, you're already part of it.